Right On Press presents Criminology 1001, a Right On Press feature. Distributed by Right On Press for Right On Press. Copyright 2021, Right On Press e-Publishing LLC, all rights reserved. Narrated by Nikki Amberg. Criminology 1001, a Right On Press feature. Jennifer's eyes were heavy with fatigue, yet also somehow wide awake with anxiousness. She couldn't sleep last night, and as she straightened up in her bed, she almost fell back into it. The tired soul removed her silk sleeping cap and fluffed out her magnificent hair. The dark brown locks shined brightly from the sun beaming through her window. She walked over in her underwear and a tank top to draw the curtains. Though tempted to go back to bed, she knew that wasn't an option, so she skipped over to her closet. Jennifer tended to hop around a lot. It helped her wake up, for one. It also piqued her mood and made her believe that she could get through any day and anything. The young woman waltzed over to her mirror to get a glimpse at herself before she headed out. Jennifer's hair was in two pigtails that somehow stayed within the bands holding them together. Her face was that of a goddess. Her full lips reflected the sunlight, and her rich hazel eyes demanded attention. She was slender and fit. The freshman 15 seemed to have gotten its share of every Kalo State student except her. Though Jennifer was a criminology student, anyone could have just as easily mistaken her for a model. Her waist was slim, but her hips widened out just enough in her Nike leggings. She threw on a plain t-shirt with KSU Class of 2006 written on its faded letters. Her caramel complexion shined bright as she opened the curtain just a tad to feel the sun kiss her skin. As Jennifer, now wide awake, bounced over to close her closet door, she looked at her graduation gown and smiled. It had been pressed for weeks, no months. On a nailed rack in the top of her closet, her matching cap sat unbothered on a mannequin head. Soon, she whispered to herself, I'm almost finished. Jennifer opened the door that led into her living room. The kitchen was small, but cute. It was a simple, tall, bar-like island directly behind the living room. There were 3 chairs for people to eat, and the oven microwave piece was placed directly below a row of cabinets. An eager Jennifer put 2 slices of bread in the toaster and proceeded to stomp over to the couch in the living room. "Sarah!" Jennifer yelled as she marched towards the sofa. She looked down at her roommate, who was sprawled out on the couch under a giant man who'd she'd never seen. "What do you have a room for?" Jennifer continued. "I have too much to think about today. I don't have time to deal with your crappy living choices. Put some clothes on and please clean the damn couch." For someone who was unusually optimistic and lighthearted, Jennifer was easily brought out of character by her roommate. "Sorry, Jen. I'll get right on it," Sarah replied. "Just gotta wait until this mammoth wakes up." Sarah's pale, naked body was only partially exposed. She was heavier than most, and her wavy blonde hair was a mess from what must have been an interesting night, to say the least. Most of her body was covered by the fair-skinned werewolf that must have passed out on her sometime last night. Jennifer let out a sigh to let Sarah know she despised her. Her toast popped up and she buttered it, and began a beeline back to her room. She glanced at the morning news and rested her free hand on the kitchen island, stopping in her tracks. 3 black youths were being escorted to a police van. They had only been arrested for vandalism, yet there were about 15 officers guiding them, and the boys couldn't have been older than 12 years old. Jennifer remembered when her brother, Michael, was misidentified in an assault case. The county jail took him, and she never saw him outside those bars again. Michael was also 12 when it all happened. She was a sophomore in college, and she remembered him begging her through the glass. "Sis, they got it all wrong," he'd say through his tears. "It ain't me, Jen. You a criminology major, right? Tell 'em what's up." She remembered not being able to help. Her studies had honestly just begun, and all she could do is go back day after day and make a promise she would never get to keep. When she was a junior, her family was informed that her brother committed suicide in jail, but the county never returned the body. Jennifer gritted her teeth and clenched her fist. That's why, she thought. That's why I need to do this today. Oh, that's terrible, Sarah said under her breath. Not as terrible as you look, Jennifer thought as she stormed into her room and slammed the door. After Jen ate, she slipped into something a bit more presentable. Today was the day she would finish her capstone project. She had always been disgusted and appalled at the way America treated people like her. People with a little bit of pigment in their skin. It was frustrating, disappointing, and infuriating. We're the first ones corporate America depends on for money and culture, Jen thought, but the last ones who get a chance in the court of law. Taking up a major study in criminology was the only thing Jen thought would eventually bring some sort of change, even if it was only a minute. She often thought she was naive to think she could do anything that mattered, but then questioned if she needed to. Above all, after almost 5 years of studying, she realized that she didn't need to change anything, but that she only had to uphold the rights of her people. There was nothing inherently wrong with the laws that already existed. The only problem was that blacks never seemed to get to use these laws the same way as everyone else. Jennifer had no experience in the field, and as part of her capstone project, she was scheduled to start the day with an interview. She had decided to take the route of questioning a death row inmate. While Jen wanted this to matter, she couldn't help but think that this was a cop-out. She wondered what this interview could accomplish. After all, a death row inmate is just waiting to die. What life-changing question could she possibly ask him? Was she there for him or her? Did she choose the right way to culminate all her studies? Was this project inconsiderate of the inmate's current situation? Jen released her weight onto her bed and covered her face with her hands. She took a deep breath in and out and whispered a prayer to a God she only believed in on occasion. After that, Jennifer rose and got her game face on. As she prepared to head to the prison, Jen grabbed her paperwork and went over the basics. She sat down at her desk and like a broom used her arm to quickly make a clean workspace. The police chief's nephew, Tommy Rankin, had been murdered. Apparently someone got him really good in the neck, almost to the point where his head had almost fallen off. He was only 11. So he was probably just overpowered by the murderer. A little sting crawled up Jen's neck. She held it down. She had no time to be sick, though the details of this particular murder were sickening. If she wanted to make the kind of change she believed in, this is the least disturbing thing she'd see. The victim files as well as the suspect files were all there, but as she continued to read through the paperwork, a familiar uneasiness twisted her gut like spoiled milk. That's odd, Jen thought. The accused lived over an hour away from the crime scene. If the victim lived in near the city's edge, this guy came from the backwoods. It makes no sense. As she continued shuffling through the papers, the parents seemed to have little to say about the killing. She couldn't find a single statement from the boy's parents. She quickly closed the files like a good book when you finish it. Enough of that, she thought to herself as she threw on a windbreaker, grabbed her paperwork, opened the door, and headed outside. As she tapped the button on her phone to call an Uber, Jen looked around at the nature surrounding her. She liked this. It was a warm fire next to her heart. There are some things society can't even ruin, and she valued nature as one of those things. The greenery was just fully blooming as it was the middle of spring. The sun was like an adrenaline shot, a boost of confidence that grabbed Jennifer as soon as she stepped foot inside. The breeze politely brushed by just enough to make her windbreaker worth the hassle. Jen lived in KSU off-campus housing. Not a dorm, but not an apartment. It was just 15 minutes away from campus, so the commute wasn't bad for residents, but other students would rarely go out of their way to bother you or try to hang out. It allowed for students like her to be able to step away from the nonsense that is college and fully focus on her studies. She wondered how much more effective living there would have been without Sarah and her narco-like lifestyle. As she was walking down the stairs from her apartment to the ground level, she saw her ride pulling around the corner. She held her papers close to her chest like a loved one and took a deep breath and opened the door of the car. Uber for Jennifer? When Jennifer arrived at the prison center, it was like the start of a bad dream. Fences with barbed wire and reinforced barriers opened and swallowed her as she walked deeper and deeper into the prison building. Central Prison had 29 acres of land all to itself, and already Jen felt like there was no escape, and she wasn't even an inmate. The eagerness she had leaving her house left her quickly. The prison sucked the spirit out of her like an exorcism. The facility was simply massive and almost breathtaking in the saddest way possible. The fact that a prison could be this stunning troubled Jennifer. As she raced the clock headed towards death row, which was in the depths of the facility, she kept her head down. Through the standard wings of the jail, Jen was reminded of a college life she never lived. Men shouting profanities, catcalling and laughing as she sped by. The smell of makeshift drugs and body odor followed her down the walkway. She could even feel the draft created by the hundreds of hands reaching out towards her as she pushed forward towards her destination. After following the path back past the standard cell blocks, Jen lifted her eyes just a little bit to check her surroundings. Her heart skipped a beat as she noticed she had appeared in front of a large metal access door. Jennifer shuffled through her manila folder and looked for her access card she had for the day. She shakily showed the guard her identification for passage, and then after 3 earth-shattering alarms sounded, a loud click followed, and the guard pulled the door open. Jennifer knew she had arrived at death row because as the door opened, a heavy air invited her in. The corridor was narrower than a balance beam, and it was quiet. It was uncomfortably quiet. When Jen thought of a prison, she had thought of a rowdy free-for-all. She was shocked to be greeted with this sudden stillness in what she thought was the worst wing of the building. While the air was heavy, it was very much still at peace. "You must be our little guest," a guard honked as he appeared around the bend. "Just come back this way. We got 'em all readied up for you. If this fool gives you any trouble, though, just holler and we'll make sure his execution comes sooner than later." The guard laughed hysterically, and Jennifer frowned, knowing this was the kind of guy who performed primarily for himself. "Thank you, sir," Jennifer said shyly as the guard brought her into an isolated room. It was a box just a few feet back from the rest of death row. It was all white, so the 6x6 space felt like a piece of heaven behind the walls of Central Prison. The prisoner was already sitting down and looking towards the floor. His hair was curly and grown out. His beard was the shaggiest one Jen had ever seen. He looked ashamed before he even was asked a question. Jen pulled the tattered chair out from the table and winced as the chalkboard screech jumped into her ear. "Hello, Rashad." Jennifer was nervous and she didn't want to mispronounce his name, so she almost whispered it as she tried to get the ball rolling on his interview. "Hey," the prisoner started softly. "How are you doing today?" "I'm okay," Jen replied as she flipped through her papers looking for the interview questions she'd prepared. "Just give me a second." Crap, 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 crap. "I just need to find my interview sheet. I know I have it, just bear with me." She gave a lousy grin as she tried to hold herself together. This project will show her work in the field, and she had left the most important piece of writing back at her apartment. How could you be so stupid, Jennifer thought as she scolded herself. "Aren't you a criminology major?" the man asked. "Yeah, I am. This is so unprofessional. So just ask me what you want to know. Isn't there some passion behind the work? A reason you want to do this?" For a split second, the prisoner's brown eyes looked into Jen's heart. She thought to herself that her brother was speaking through him. It was a feeling that was all too familiar to her. "Well, Rashad," Jen started, "what happened?" Rashad chuckled. Then Jennifer watched as his smirk was replaced with a frown. "In my book, it was one of those wrong place at the wrong time kind of deals, you know? I was in a gas station buying some snacks. I was really broke at the time. I guess that was just something I liked to do and could afford. I was walking to my buddy's house and I hear this terrible screaming from one of the houses. It was a little kid, man. I was walking up to see what was wrong. I thought maybe I could help, and then I heard the sirens. I don't know how they got there so fast, but I was the first thing they saw and they snatched me up. Maybe I should be in here for not calling anyone, but I gotta admit, something always felt off. It was right to jail from there, and then it took no time for the court to throw me in here. I heard it was the police chief's nephew, the one who got killed. I never stood a chance. As soon as they picked me out, I was already a criminal on paper. So much for justice, because whoever really did it is probably still out there laughing his ass off. Well, that's... As Jen began to reply, the guard burst through the door on the prisoner's side of the bleach box. Is that boy talking that nonsense again? The guard violently grabbed Rashad's shoulders and shook him like a rag doll. His underfed body was easily shaken up. He had put his head back down again, looking ashamed and timid. No one had probably ever listened to him. Jen winced as the guard slapped him hard on the cheek. What did we tell you about that boy? Don't go opening your mouth about shit you don't understand. Hey, he was only answering my question. As Jen attempted to set the record straight, a devilish glare from the guard stopped her in her tracks. Without the backwards guard saying anything else, she understood the story she just heard was never meant to be told. It was never meant to leave the confines of Central Prison. She realized that her work here was done, but her chance to make a change had made itself plain. There was no way Rashad had committed that murder, and the evidence Jennifer had gathered thus far had started to make a little more sense. She had to set this straight if it was the last thing she did. If she didn't, an innocent man would surely die. Don't you move or get antsy, miss, the guard called as he tossed Rashad back into his cell. This is my house and you ain't gonna be starting no fires in it, you heard? The flashbacks of her brother swelled up in Jen's mind like a rash. She wanted to lose all control and lash out. She wanted to bash the guard's head in. It was futile, though. She was a black woman in a white man's prison. She needed to get the hell out of there and calculate a better plan of action. While the twisted guard was getting carried away in Rashad's cell, Jennifer exited the interview room and scurried by like a mouse. Lucky for her, the door was cracked from the time she entered the cell block. She nearly bruised her shoulder, making an opening big enough for her to pass through. Her thoughts took priority over her body for a few brief moments. She thought the case over to herself as she ran through the prison with no reserve, this time swinging on any hand that got too close and cutting off any guards that stood in her way. She quickly found herself back outside, headed to the only place that could handle this. Upon arriving at the district attorney's office, Jen was already irate with the lavishness of the building. She thought to herself that there was no way anyone that saw the elaborate city through these glass walls could care about what happened to a single prisoner miles and miles away. The stares of the DA's employees felt like 15 space heaters beaming on her all at the same time. She was an uninvited guest, but you'd think Jen owned the place. The heat only cooled the ice in Jen's veins as she walked swiftly, searching for the most elaborate door she could find in the building. The police chief protected his brother, Jen thought as she carefully surveyed the floor and the office spaces like a hawk. So the brother just slaughtered his son, cashed out, and probably took a ride far out somewhere. The house was sold right after the investigation closed. That's too weird to be a coincidence. It's also kind of odd that neither parent has a written statement regarding the murder. All of Jen's studied data on this case was shining like the morning sun. With everything she knew, put in context with what Rashad said, she smirked. There was no way Rashad's case wouldn't see a second trial. This half-assed investigation, Jennifer thought, just might get the case dismissed altogether. When she arrived at a mahogany double door at the end of a hallway, Jennifer decided that it was the one she'd been searching for. As she burst into the DA's room, the attorney looked up and his face became twisted, constipated, and confused. He was a plump man and was laid back in his leather office chair. His sandy hair swooped over the left side of his face, and the fat on his cheeks hung onto his bones like clothes on a drying rack. "Who the heck do you think you are?" the attorney exclaimed, as his cheeks danced with each syllable. You got about 5 seconds to step on out of my office, girl. Jen stuck her chest out, then shuddered. No, she said. Well, the man replied, you can't be as smart as you think you are, marching in here like that. I'll humor you, though. What's it gonna be today? We got the wrong guys. We fumble an investigation. I can't wait to hear this one. The DA smiled a crooked smile with yellowing teeth. Jen didn't understand. This man so pridefully stood by his occupation's greatest failures. She didn't have the words to throw at him. What do you say to the man that embraces his greatest failures? Rashad Jones, the death row inmate in Central Prison, Jen started. You heard about him too? As a matter of fact, I have, the DA said. Easiest case we ever put away, honestly. He practically turned himself into the state. I honestly don't even understand why he wanted to get involved. I understand this guy's in a bad place, and my condolences to the man. But the state loved it. You seem to know the case well. All I can say is that the state and the people saw his conviction fit for the murder. And that is truly all that matters as far as my resume is concerned. Do yourself a favor. If you want to have a career after whatever misguided journey this is, go ahead and walk away from this. Learn from it. I promise you the police department won't even want to move on the only reasonable suspect in this case. They love the chief, and as far as I'm concerned, his brother is off limits. Besides, with everything that goof knew, it still ain't get him out of jail. So you really want to do this, girl? Jen opened her mouth, but the only thing that came out was air. She took one last look at the district attorney, who was now just goofily holding the straps of his suspenders, still sporting his sickening smile. She wanted to do what was right, but also worried about her own future for the first time since her brother's death. Jennifer sluggishly turned around and left the office. Her beautiful curly locks fell over her face as she left. As the doors closed behind her, she heard the DA's sarcastic voice behind her. Good day, ma'am. When the doors shut, Jennifer was met outside with a petite young woman who looked to be in her 30s. She had her index finger over her lips, and the other hand softly pushed a black leather folder into her chest. She whispered softly, something inaudible, and then quickly walked Jen down the hall into a small cutaway. She was shy but hasty. The redhead quickly opened the door to an empty conference room and shut it silently. Jennifer was loosely holding the folder she was given and looking at the woman with a blank stare. Her mouth was open like she wanted to speak, but yet again was met with her own foolish silence. I'm the assistant DA, Holly Maxwell, she said. I'm going to be quick because you're already on his radar. I'm just like you. Doing the harder right is always better than the easier wrong. Strong women like us are always the ones forced to clean up the inherent greed and error of men. I heard what you had to say. Holly took a deep breath, sniffled, and wiped away a tear before gravity could take it. You really are the future of what this country can be. It all starts with a dream. I know you have that. What I gave you should help. You're on your own from here, though. Come tomorrow, when they find out that information is gone, I'll be out of here too, forever. Do with it as you please. It's the least I can do. I've stood by and let people like Rashad be tormented for too long. I need to do my part and fight for the right side of the law. Just get out of here as fast as you can and read it somewhere alone. This should have been presented in court years ago. You got this. I'm with you. With a final tear wiped away, Holly floated out of the office as if nothing happened. After a few moments of shock, Jennifer caressed the soft leather. The front had "Retrial for Rashad Jones" written in bold chicken scratch on a Post-it. Jennifer smiled to herself and tucked the newly acquired paperwork under her windbreaker. She rocks, Jen thought as she quietly closed the office door behind her and headed for the exit. When Jennifer finally made it back home, the night was dark as space. She got back to her room and put her manila folder down on her desk along with the black leather folio she received from Holly. Jen didn't even know if this was any good. She wondered if Holly was a setup. Jen thought of her life as a spy movie in this moment, and she was almost afraid to open the file. As she slowly pulled apart the front and back covers, she couldn't believe her eyes. She started reading, and before she knew it, Jen was studying a completely different case than the murder she had reviewed all year at KSU. The information was game-changing. Before this, Jennifer was looking at a puzzle with missing pieces. Now that she had recovered the missing pieces, and for the first time, Jen was able to see the full picture. For the first time since she took an interest in the case, Jen slept soundly. She closed her eyes and dreamed that Michael hugged her and said he was proud. "Thanks for looking out, Holly. Wish you could meet Michael," Jennifer thought as she drifted into rest with a smile. When the sun rose the next morning, so did Jen. She jumped out of bed and skipped into the kitchen. She was relieved that Sarah wasn't in the living area. As she turned on some water for tea and put some bread in the toaster, she happily went over the information she had received a day prior. The TV in the background was just added static to Jen's elevated mood. She was giddy with excitement. She couldn't wait to see the DA tongue-tied when she showed him this. Even better, with evidence like this being withheld, Rashad very well may be let free. As she looked up, the news channel was on like it always was. She walked towards the screen steadily. Then, as the news anchor began to speak, her heart sank into her stomach. A photo of a young, energetic Rashad was on the screen. Today, Rashad Jones, an inmate in Central Prison, was executed after spending only a few years on death row, the anchor began. It was decided in some apparent state and county meetings that anyone willing to lay hands on family members of law enforcement should quickly be an example to others. The DA, Samuel Ulcer, said he is glad another threat is off the streets and hopes it sends a message to the community here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Now to weather. Bob talked to us. Jennifer collapsed to her knees, and the slip of stained, wrinkled paper she had been going over slowly slid off her hand onto the rug flooring. It was a sworn written police statement that never made it to the courtroom, and it read, "To whom it may concern, my son, Tommy Rankin, was murdered about a day ago. They're going to punish a man that had nothing to do with it on account of my brother-in-law, Lee Rankin, being a dirty police chief and my ex-husband, William Rankin, being a greedy bastard. I left that gluttonous snake years ago, and when I heard about my baby boy Tommy, I almost sent myself to the other side. I know my husband did it. That's why I left him. He asked me one more time if I wanted to cash out Tommy's life insurance. I told him we'd have to kill the boy to do it. I was joking, of course, but that man would break down to just about anything for a quick dollar. I couldn't bear it, so I left him. I fought so hard for my boy, I really did, but they exposed my addiction to prescription painkillers and alcohol during the trial. I'd never see my sweet boy again, and anything I said regarding his well-being quickly became irrelevant. The boy had to stay with his father. All of that to say, no matter how much I prayed, he ended up killing Tommy still. If you believe anyone else committed this crime, you might be just as stupid as Will is. The dumb bastard called me as he finished to ask me if I wanted some of the money. I have the date and time of that phone call, and I will happily testify in a court of law against him. I hope we can at least get the phone records found and maybe lock Will up. I loved him, but for the people's sake, he don't deserve to see the light of day. Best, Betsy McGee, formerly Rankin. P.S. If you let this fall into Sam's hands, Lee is good as gone. He won't do his job and certainly won't go out of his way for this one. Sam, Lee, and Will play so friendly they might as well be sleeping together. This needs to go to someone who is a true believer in justice and this country's laws. Bring in my son's killer, please." Jennifer was crying, and the note was now spotted with tears. She fell back on the floor in front of the television and cried for what felt like years. She looked up and kept saying in her head, "I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry, Michael." The end.